Great. Well, I'm going to get our PowerPoint switched and then I'll introduce our next speaker. No other presentation open. Oh, and would you like a laser pointer for the cursor?
Can I just use the mouse?
Yeah, I can turn the laser point, the mouse.
Oh yeah, sure.
There. Or it could be a pen.
Laser pointer.
Laser pointer. Okay. Awesome. Thanks, y'all, for your patience. Yeah, our next speaker is Dr. Louis Nottingham, and he's going to talk to us about integrated pest management in Northwest Washington berries. Thanks, Louis.
Okay, thank you. I swear I'm not texting. I'm just setting my timer so I don't go over. Thank you all for being here this morning. So as Betsy said, I'm going to speak about integrated pest management in Northwest Washington berries. I'm going to start off talking a little bit about integrated pest management in general, and then talk about some of the work we've been doing to enhance our integrated pest management programs. So just a little background on myself. I'm the horticultural crops entomologist at the Northwest Rec. So that means I have to work on all the crops in the area. So there's me vacuum sampling some potatoes. I also work in seed crops and then of course berry crops, which is what I'm going to talk about today. Before I started this position in 2022, I worked in tree fruit in Wenatchee. So I did that for about 5 years, working in pears, apples, and cherries. And prior to that, I worked in vegetables in Virginia during my PhD. And even before that, I was still counting things. I had about 5 years out of college where I was working for fish and game departments across the West. So basically, I've got almost 20 years of counting various animals. So I'm pretty good at it at this point. So let's talk about IPM. What is IPM? This is the softball of the day because I already put it in the title slide, right? So integrated pest management, but really what does that mean? So I'll start with the first thing that I think is a bit of a misconception about IPM. We have this thought that IPM is a type of management. You can like go back and look at your program or something that you did and say, yeah, that was IPM. And that's actually incorrect. So IPM is a decision-making process. This is something that we use to help us make decisions. So when we think about types of management, which IPM actually is not, things that are types of management are conventional, organic, no spray, very concrete things that we did. Whereas IPM is the thing that led us to each decision. So there are decision-making processes that are also not IPM, which I like to show because it gives you an idea of what IPM is kind of like. So pros and cons list, that's how we make a decision. A decision matrix, there's a kind of a complicated way to make a decision. A Ouija board, that's an old school way to make a decision. Or integrated pest management. So how do we use integrated pest management to make decisions? So I think most people know these first two priorities. We have a set of priorities that we use for kind of coming to each decision that we make in our pest management strategies. Everyone kind of gets the idea that, okay, yeah, it's what, you gotta have to have like a lot of different techniques and you're supposed to use them all or something like that. So people kind of get that part, and yes, that's part of it. You're supposed to use a lot of different techniques. So you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. What is that basket? Generally pesticides, right? That's the main thing that we're using. So we're trying to diversify. So we're not just doing one thing, because if we lose that one strategy, then we're cooked. The other part that I think most people kind of understand is that, all right, the idea is that we're supposed to, be a little less toxic, maybe have lower disturbance of the ecology and overall hazard to either the farm workers or to the consumers, whatever. So basically a little bit safer. The other parts of that I think most people don't realize are part of integrated pest management and are really important is that our strategies have to actually be practical. They need to fit into the rest of our program, and they need to fit in easily. We got to kind of like want to do them and for them not to be a pain. They need to have like long-term benefits like pest suppression. I mean, we actually want to suppress the pests, but not just like initially, in the long term as well. So throughout the entire season or even through multiple seasons. These are the things we want to think about. And then, of course, economic benefits. It's got to be economical. If it's not economical, why are we farming? We're not here to have fun. We're here to put food on the table, right? So there are also steps that make this a systematic process. And again, this is why this is a decision-making process. All the way from the first step, which is the most obvious, you have to actually correctly identify your pest, down to understanding the biology, the pest potential, what are the different strategies that we can use for a particular pest or pest complex, putting all those pieces together and developing a program, and then monitoring the success and evaluating the outcomes. So this is all what comes together so that we can make these decisions, do them strategically, and have the best, most optimal outcome. So it's a little complicated. It's not just, do what the guy tells me and spray when I'm supposed to spray. Why should I waste my time doing this if my program already works? And we just heard a talk where it's like conventional management works, right? We're doing great. So why bother with IPM? I put this example up last year as well. So if you've seen it twice, sorry, but I think it's a pretty good example. So there are two systems that are very close to me because I worked in them for quite a while. We have apples and pears. Everyone knows Washington as the apple state. Not everyone recognizes that pears are a big part of it, but Washington is also the #1 pear producer in the United States as well. Apples are kind of like this IPM success story, whereas pears, they're kind of just getting started with IPM. And I want to show you what that looks like overall. So back in the early 90s, both of these systems looked almost identical. They're very similar in in the crops themselves, but also how they were managed. They used mostly broad spectrum insecticides. It didn't cost them too much. Everything was working pretty decently. They were happy. But what happened in the mid 90s, there was kind of a lot of Washington apples were always kind of like the big brother. A lot of research went to Washington apples and developing integrated pest management strategies. So they started to integrate techniques that at the time were more expensive. They were harder to do. No one wanted to do it. So they were using mating disruption. They were starting to use phenology models. They were integrating things like using these smaller trees that were kind of weird and new cultivars that were a little bit risky. But in the end, all these prices have basically come down when you think about inflation, and they're spending about the same amount of money on pest management. But on top of that, they're using almost entirely selective insecticides along with their other IPM techniques like mating disruption, and these phenology models, and even some mechanical strategies. Whereas in pears, they've kind of kept doing the same thing. They used the programs that were available to them. And as time has gone on, these programs have started to fail in various ways. They've lost pesticides. They've developed resistance. The main pests have developed resistance to them. And it's all starting to get a lot more expensive, and it's not working as well. So now pear programs are costing close to $1,800 an acre. So it's a big deal. And this is actually really well demonstrated when you think about research priorities. So all of our commodity groups, we set out our priorities for research every year, right? What kind of things that we want to look into. Well, apples at this point, they're not even really thinking about pest management. The #1 things that they're putting money into are things that make them money. Stuff like high density plantings, developing new cultivars, how to train the tree differently so it produces more. So all these all these things that actually how do we just make more money, not fight this uphill battle. Whereas pears, now they're finally doing the IPM research because pests have just become such an issue for them. And it is this uphill battle that has been a real struggle. And that's where most of their money's going. So in the end, when we look at these two industries, they're pretty dramatically different. Apples, you go to the grocery store, you just see tons of different varieties. There's so many more acres, and on top of it, they're a lot more valuable. So the overall farm gate values are almost double what they are for pears. So that is what IPM can essentially do, even if it doesn't seem like it's this incredibly necessary thing to happen at once because maybe the programs are working. But it's something that if you can get ahead of it, start thinking about it ahead of time and start developing some of these programs, it'll benefit in the long run, or at least that's the goal. So where are we at? So Washington blueberries and raspberries is kind of the topic for today. And as I stated, we have pretty good programs for controlling our current pests, but that may not last forever, and we need to be thinking about the future. So we are the #1 producer of blueberries and raspberries. We have a lot of pests in both of these systems, and then it just got worse in 2009 when spotted wing Drosophila showed up. So this is this little fruit fly with a serrated ovipositor that can lay its eggs in our fruit, and it just threw everything off. So we went from spraying between maybe 3 to 4 times a season to upwards of 8 to even 10 times a season, especially in Western Washington, to control this along with all of our other pests. And what can that do? Well, you can see increases in secondary pests like our aphids, which vector scorch, thrips and spider mites in raspberries, which feed on leaves or even on blossoms. And then we can start to see resistance to these insecticides, and that's when we really run into problems. So an important part of integrated pest management is conserving natural enemies. So why do we care about that? Is this just entomologists trying to be cute? No, I promise it's not. For one, these are free pest control. We love natural enemies to be out there, and it's not just a nice way to control our pests. This actually keeps a lot of other pests in check. So keeping our aphids down, keeping our spider mites down, keeping our thrips down. Our predators and parasitoids do this for us, but on top of that, they slow the rate of resistance development. And this is because it adds another mortality factor. Resistance occurs because you're using normally 1 or 2 ways to kill a pest, and eventually the pest is going to develop, those genes are going to show up that are resistant to that one way that you're trying to kill it, and then all of a sudden that method doesn't work anymore. If you add other mortality factors like predators, it's a better chance that you're going to kill those resistant insects that have those resistant genes. So sorry, I forgot to mention, this is a chart of a survey we did in 2023. And this basically shows our natural enemy counts in standard conventional plots, integrated pest management plots, and organic plots. And what I want to point out here is that these IPM numbers are not very high, and that's because our integrated pest management programs basically involve substituting 1 or 2 sprays. So I think what this tells us is that we need to make some improvements on what we consider integrated pest management, what we're willing to do. It's just going to take more research and looking into how we can integrate some practical methods. So another thing that is kind of on the horizon is there is resistance that has been detected, particularly in California, to spinosad, which is a common organic insecticide used for spotted wing Drosophila. And if they're starting to see resistance to an organic material, there's a good chance that we could see resistance to our conventional materials in the future. So again, this is another reason why it's important for us to develop some integrated techniques so that we're not just putting all of our eggs in one basket. And finally, there's a lot of other pressures on pesticides. We can lose a pesticide whether it's resistance or not. The EPA is always going, they're never going to give you pesticides back. They're only going to take them away slowly. So you can lose a pesticide such as chlorpyrifos just a few years ago. And once that's gone, if that's one of your key materials, you need something else to fall back on. So moving into the next part of the talk, this is what my lab does. We try to research new, interesting techniques that we can add to our IPM toolbox. So I'm going to talk about some of the things we've been testing over the last couple of years since I started here, and maybe some future opportunities as well. So one thing that we're looking into in Western Washington is a product called Decoy. This is a bait or kind of like this food grade gum that comes in this cute little cube. Our My master's student Claire, who's working on this, calls this bug candy. Basically, it's just a very highly attractive piece of bait that you put in these canisters. They sit on an irrigation line, and they cause the SWD to lay their eggs in that, preferentially over fruit. So in some work that's been done in California and in Oregon, they've shown that this product can reduce spotted wing levels from anywhere from 40 up to 90%, depending on the field that it's been tested in. So we wanted to try it in Washington. In 2023, we set up some field trials. These are pretty low replication, but larger plots. We had 2 reps in an untreated blueberry or raspberry field and 3 reps in an untreated blueberry field, where we compared the decoy to untreated plots. In this year, we didn't see any effect from the decoy. There was maybe a slight reduction numerically in blueberries, but not significant by any means. However, there's a lot going on here. These are completely unsprayed plots, so the numbers were astronomically high of SWD. It may be getting drowned out, or maybe we just need more consistency among our plots. So, we don't give up quickly in these kinds of things. It can take years to develop these techniques. So we were happy to get some funding from the Washington Blueberry Commission and the Commission on Integrated Pest Management to kind of test this more thoroughly. And now we're in the first year of 2 years of looking at this. We had a plot at Sakuma Brothers in their organic field. They allowed us to test 2 different rates of the decoy, and being a much more uniform plot, this won't have as much variability. Claire is going to, my master's student, she's going to talk about this tomorrow and give some results. And I would give you some results, but I don't have the data yet. Claire's probably still crunching some numbers as we speak. But tomorrow she's going to talk about our results from 2024. So another thing we're looking into is kaolin for suppression of blueberry aphids. This was something, kaolin clay is a white particle film that you spray on the plant. It creates this barrier, and also it's both a tactile and a visual repellent. So bugs don't like to touch it, and also it makes the plant look weird, so they're less likely to land on it. This has been shown to work for blueberry aphids in some past studies, so we wanted to test it and see if we could get it to work in our system. It's also been used on a number of other pests, from psyllids to whiteflies, and normally it's pretty effective. You just kind of have to figure out the right timing to use it. And unfortunately with Ericaphis, we don't know as much about their life cycle and when the best time to attack this thing is with a product like this. So this year, we just started this experiment. Again, Claire Winslow is running this experiment as part of her master's work, where we're looking at a fall timing. So an after harvest spray compared to a spring spray for using Surround to control aphids. The idea being that aphids actually have a migratory period where they come into blueberries in the fall and lay their eggs. If we can hit it before that, we might be able to prevent that from happening. The other important time is right before bloom, when aphids start to really increase. So if we spray at that time, maybe it can kind of just like disrupt them, because they don't like the feel of the product. So the young aphids may die basically if there's white film all over the plant. So this is an experiment that just started. We'll have some data for it next year, but we're pretty excited to see what happens here. This is an experiment we did in 2023 looking at a new insecticide. We don't get a lot of new insecticides these days, especially not conventional ones. If you've seen any of Alan's talks, he's mentioned this quite a few times. So this is plinazoline. It's a product from Syngenta. And so we looked at it for spotted wing and aphids. It does have efficacy against spotted wing Drosophila. Not quite as good as Mustang Max in this trial, but definitely some significant reductions there. And then in terms of aphids, we didn't see a significant difference, but we had super high variability in the control. And when you look at the high rate of plinazoline, it looks like we're starting to see something there. So I think some more research is warranted, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is some efficacy taking place. Speaking of Alan, Alan and I started a project that was led by Alan to actually look at it's the development of insecticide resistance to in spotted wing to our various common insecticides that we're using. Because, like I said earlier, there's been resistance detected in California. So we wanted to start now to figure out if we do have any resistance taking place to some of these common insecticides. So we've started screening this year. We've looked at, I think, around 10 populations total, 5 on the east side, 5 or more in central Washington where Alan is, against quite a few materials. This is kind of a fun project. Maybe my favorite part is that Alan convinced me that I need to buy a hot dog roller for this. As you can see here, so not making hot dogs, we're actually making poison glass. But this is a standardized nationwide method for doing resistance screening for spotted wing Drosophila. So this is like a well-vetted procedure, which is great. So we can pretty easily screen a lot of materials against spotted wing. The toughest part is just getting the populations going. So we have to go collect berries and then rear them out and make sure that we have enough spotted wing to get enough reps. But we were able to do this for 3 insecticides this year on 5 populations in Western Washington. And so far, there's no big cause for alarm. It looks like most of our populations are still susceptible to the most common materials that we're using, the Entrust, Mustang Max, and Malathion. However, we need to screen a lot more populations to be certain of this, because resistance can kind of poke its way through in just small amounts at first. So if we do start to see resistance taking place, we need to sample quite a bit more. The last thing I'm going to talk about, and this is new for 2025, is a sterile insect technique. So this is an awesome technique as far as IPM goes. So this is when you release sterilized males of a pest into the population, and then they basically cannot mate successfully with females. I'm really excited about this for spotted wing because this has been a really successful technique throughout history in entomology. This is kind of like, it's almost like the gold standard of IPM in terms of actual success stories. So as I stated, the idea is that you turn a bunch of males sterile, you release them in huge numbers into the population. They have a failed mating attempt with a female, and then there's just that much less offspring that happens because of it. So throughout history, this has been demonstrated in numerous pests in both agriculture and in insect vectors like mosquitoes. Here are a few of the successful pests in the United States that this has been used on. So codling moth, actually this is the codling moth, it was in British Columbia where they completely adopted a sterile insect release using irradiation, and it's almost eliminated codling moth from British Columbia, Canada growing regions. Pink bollworm, they successfully eradicated from Arizona and much of the Southwest using sterile insect releases. The medfly in California citrus, they have introductions regularly of medfly, and they can go out and release sterile insects and it knocks them down. So this has been a very successful method. And the original example was actually screwworm in livestock. They're able to eradicate this from this really devastating livestock pest. And what's great is that 2 of these are flies, just like spotted wing Drosophila. So I have a lot of hope for this technique. Another thing that is important is that your pest is a big problem, so that a lot of money will go to this. It's got to appear valuable to the industry that's producing this. And luckily, spotted wing is a huge worldwide pest, so there is a lot of money going towards this. So the company that is currently developing this technique is based out of St. Louis, and they are kind of partnered with another very large chemical company out of St. Louis that you may have heard of. Luckily that's good because they have good financial backing to make this work. They've created a pretty cool design for how to create the sterilized males, which is through CRISPR technology, and then get them into a mechanism where they can be easily released. So basically, the sterilized or the males and the females that lay the sterilized male eggs will lay it into this media, which then gets shipped to you in a box. And the males are developing all the while. And then you basically put the little box in the field, and all these sterile males come out and hopefully knock down the population. So we're hoping to test this in 2025. We're currently applying for funding to try this out and see if we can get some efficacy with it. It also does pend USDA and EPA approval. However, this company was able to get approval in 2024 to do field releases, so we're pretty confident they'll be able to do it again in 2025. But something that we're pretty excited about on the horizon. And with that, I thank you for listening. I really appreciate all the funding sources for the work that we've done. Our gifts and donations from various sources as well. People that donated research sites to us across the Northwest and Central Washington, and then of course all of our collaborators. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Louis. Does anybody have any questions about that great presentation? Coming to you with a microphone.
With your sterile release program, can you comment on timing? What generation you would be trying to target? And also the adjacent habitat, whether that would need to be treated?
Sure. So a lot of this is currently unknown, and that's basically what we need to research. But the current plan for me, the way that I like to approach new technologies, is to hit them with it as hard as possible, so that if there's any potential for it to work, it will see it in our initial trials. So what I would probably do is, before fruit ripening, start doing releases, and you have to do weekly releases because these don't survive. So they go out there and they mate and then they die. The genes don't survive in the population. They just knock down what's there. So weekly releases for probably from about a little before fruit ripening is what we would try to do. And I'll just comment too on that. It sounds like that would be pretty expensive. The goal of Agrigene and what they think they can do, because of the mechanism they're using, the CRISPR mechanism, it's supposedly relatively easy for them to mass produce these. So they're hoping to keep the cost around $50 an acre for the entire season. I don't know if that's going to be feasible or not in the long run, but that is the goal. So that would be pretty reasonable. It's not too terribly much more than a mid-level spray. So, any other questions?
Oh, can you wait actually for a microphone? I'll come to you.
Hi, in the past, how long has it taken for the sterile program to get to market from the research phase?
That's a good question. I think it's been pretty different for every program, and then it also depends on what the funding source is for it. So quite a few of them, first off, most of the ones in the past have all used irradiation. So they have these large irradiation facilities that often need to be built, and they take multi-millions of dollars. Often they're backed up by government. So in this case where they're using a CRISPR technique, it could be completely different. The main thing to get past is regulations, because it is a genetically modified organism. Luckily, you're not eating the GMO in this case. It's just being released, and then it inherently dies. So to answer your question, I don't know, to put it lightly, but we'll see. The hope would be that this could. I don't see any reason why it couldn't be in the next 5 to 10 years. I would hope 5. It's just, I mean, it'll require a lot of research to understand exactly how to do. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Some thanks, Louie.